Welcome back to Bammerhab, Season 5, Episode 4. Bammerhab is a podcast about one writer's attempt to dig deeper into God's Word by exploring the Greek and Hebrew words inside of it. I'm SDG Morgan, and I'll be your tour guide around this dig. Today's phrase is Hebrew, and it is a negated first-person verb, lo saniti, in Malachi 3:6, and it means, I do not change. Lo saniti was chosen by today's interview guest, Jared Luttjeboer. More on him in a bit. Lo saniti is used by God in Malachi 3:6 to describe himself. I do not change is a good translation, but there's something interesting going on in this verb. The root form, shana, literally means to duplicate or to double. It is used elsewhere in the Old Testament as a verb describing striking something again, saying something again, or doing something again. It can also mean to fold up, in the sense of multiplying something by folding it. So by extension, shana means change because it is describing change as the transmutation, alteration, or transformation of something by doing something double. The connotation here is to double deal, to double cross, to double talk, to speak with a forked tongue, as they say. We covered this a little bit in episode 25, all about the Greek term for double-mindedness, dipsukos. And so for a little bit of a different angle on that, go listen to that episode 25. That episode tackles the idea of doubleness from the negative. James tells us there that a double-minded man is cursed and should expect nothing from the Lord. Here Malachi records that God himself is of one mind. He is not a double speaker. He says something and he means it. God does not play tricks on people. He is faithful. God said he would do something for Israel, and he meant it. But the entire context of the full chapter of Malachi is apocalyptic. In this chapter, God is talking both about his first coming and his second coming. In both, he would send a messenger ahead of him to warn and prepare before arriving at his temple in Jerusalem. Then, there would be a reckoning. Now, there's a bit of a pregnant pun going on here, as in Hebrew, the word messenger is Malachi. So Malachi himself is one of the messengers preparing the way of the Lord. And in the Gospels, Jesus applied this same prophecy to John, and it will also apply to those messengers in Revelation who will prepare the world for Jesus' second coming. Hebraic prophecy is kind of cool like that. One prophecy is meant to apply to the present, the prophet Malachi, and to the future, John, and to the far future, the two witnesses of Revelation. But in the middle of this reckoning at the temple that Malachi is describing, in Malachi 3:6, God pauses to make a statement about himself. He says it's because of his own faithfulness that there is any reckoning happening at all. Because God isn't a double dealer, sin will be exposed and cleaned up. Because God isn't a double crosser, all his promises to Israel will come to pass. The two promises are linked, and Malachi hints that they may be fulfilled at the same time. We see this in the Gospels when the sin of the world was indeed exposed at Jerusalem as corrupt mankind tried and succeeded in their ultimate goal of killing God. But the goal doesn't bring about what anyone would have imagined. The ultimate sin of murdering God brings about all the promises that God had given: cleansing, redemption, healing, and health, all brought about by the worst sin imaginable, the attempted murder of God by man. In no way does that mean that sin is excused, and it will be paid for in full for all those who do not accept God's path out. That's because God doesn't change. That same reckoning that he required from Israel, from Egypt, from all the civilizations before the flood, he will have that reckoning with us, because he's not double-minded like we are. That's both the best news imaginable or the worst news, depending whether you're on God's side or still trying to fight against him. You see, God let us kill him. God let us put all our sins on him. And yet, don't ever think you're going to beat God in a fight, because you simply aren't. Just ask the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Jared Luttjeboer is the creator of the Church History Podcast and also the director of marketing at Mid-America Reformed Seminary in Dyer, Indiana. Jared's a full-time working dad who squeezes in his podcast production into the small spaces of his life. And as a dad myself, I can agree with you, Jared, that is no small feat. So, Jared, thanks for joining Bammerhab.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
How old are your kids?
3 and 1.
Oh, that's a good age.
2 boys. So
How do you have time to podcast?
dude, good question.
Yeah, I did not.
It's-
I was like, so my kids are 2 years apart, and they were 3 and 1 during COVID, so that was insane.
oh my,
And
I can imagine.
yeah, it was probably the busiest time of my life. I don't know. You're doing good.
Because season 3 has wrapped up on the Church History Project, I was really looking forward to that. Just taking just a little bit of a breather, like,
Yeah.
oh.
So you chose Malachi 3:6, and I focused in on the Hebrew phrase lo shaniti, which means I do not change in Hebrew. And in that root word, there's a concept of doubling. So basically, God is saying about himself in Malachi that he doesn't double deal and he doesn't double talk. So why did you want to focus in on this concept of God's unchanging nature?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I consider the attributes of God, his immutability or unchangeableness, I think is one of the more special ones that I really like to focus on. Because if you really think about it, the entire story of redemption depends on God being the same. And we see that all the way from Genesis to the end of Revelation. I think when I think of Malachi 3:6, I, the Lord, do not change. I even just thinking the context of that passage of Israel post exile. These are people who have just come back from mad chaos, Babylon. And then they have like this sheer audacity to say, where is the God of justice? As though God has actually like failed to show up for them. Israel is just kind of weird throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. It's funny when we think about that, but then we actually like look upon ourselves and realize that we're really no good.
Yeah, we would never.
No, we would never do that. We'll never do that. But then God's response in chapter 3 is, you could say, almost kind of like a counter accusation, because he's really telling them, you haven't been robbed of a faithful God. You've actually robbed me. And the ground of that accusation, the reason Israel still exists after all of these centuries of covenant breaking, is the very thing that is then announced in verse 6 that we're focusing on. I have not changed. I am the one who have not changed. There's a lot of comfort there that even despite our sin, past, present, and future, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, as Hebrews says. Hebrews is interesting because in some ways it's almost like this New Testament lens on Malachi 3:6, that specific verse, and I think it's chapter 13. Mm-hmm. And we now have that sure anchor in him. And if you think of an anchor as an image, anchor ships that can still blow around in storms, right?
Right.
So we can still get battered by this world, but because Jesus is our anchor, he does not change. And so that means that we can depend upon him in all circumstances.
Yeah, and I think he says it metaphorically a lot through the Psalms, at the idea of the rock or the tower. Mm-hmm. Of these are unchanging objects as well that we can relate to, because an anchor is a really good one. I don't think the Israelites were not really a seafaring culture. That's why in Hebrew is like, oh, I like that image. We get a new image rather than a rock. We get an anchor. Yeah, you can blow about your house a little bit on the rock, but you're not, the foundation's never going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's why I've heard it said, don't put your faith in your faith. Right. You don't persevere based on your faith or what your faith is. You persevere based on the one who has gifted you faith.
Yeah, it's not the object of your faith. It's not the intensity of your faith. It's the object
of your faith. Yep.
And I really like that tie back tie forward, I guess, to Hebrews, because that's kind of my specialty in this podcast. I really like looking how the Old Testament and the New Testament connect. Mm-hmm. And there's so many linkages back and forth. That is one I never thought of. But yes, that's a really interesting concept of connecting forward and connecting back. And that's what you're doing so well in your podcast. You're using history as a bridge so that we can understand where we're at by looking backwards. So in the Bible, we have the Old Testament, New Testament, and the New Testament only takes us up to a certain point. The first generation, the apostles, Jesus said, I will build my church on this rock of the apostles. And it's the New Testament. The New Testament gives us the foundation, the anchor, the rock. But there's so much more on top of it that most of us don't know about. And so that's what I'm really interested in, the way that you do this podcast. Well, you've described your podcast elsewhere as a epic journey through time, accompanied by sweeping cinematic music and gripping storytelling to discover how Jesus has been faithful to his church for millennia. So what else can you tell us about your podcast? How would you describe it?
Well, the single biggest source of inspiration for it probably was the whole project of Dr. Nick Needham's 2,000 Years of Christ Power. Fantastic set of books published by Christian Focus Publications, multi-volume survey of church history up through at least the Great Awakening right now. I believe he may have one or two yet to be published. If you or any of your listeners have not encountered them, you should. They're both academically serious, but it's completely readable.
That's really important, yeah, where you can have like the depth without...
Yep.
I've tried to read a lot of, I've had my time in academia, and some academia is just unreadable.
Yeah.
Great content, but it's unreadable. So that's a tough challenge to pull off, to do both.
What's cool about why he wrote those books is because I believe he was inspired to write them after he taught church history to, I don't know if it was I think a high school in Africa. And so this was really kicked off the journey for him. So I thought that was really cool. Anyways, his work gave me the spine and kind of the framework to approach how to do this podcast. And in case anyone's concerned, yes, I got his permission to do this. I reached out to him personally. So the show is really, and I make sure that I write this in the description too, the show is based off of his books. Now, there may be sections where he may not go into incredible depth on something, but I will. So I will make sure that I expand on certain things. The podcast has taken off, and there have been 3 seasons so far. Season 1 was all about laying the foundation with the Greco-Roman world and the world of Judaism. So what was the world like that Jesus and the disciples lived in? You really can't understand the primitive early church without knowing the world in which they lived. And so that was pretty important to me to lay the foundation there.
Right.
Season 2 is probably where you could say the story really starts to get going and pick up. And so that season really kind of describes the church being under enormous external pressure beginning and figuring out what it was and what it believed while simultaneously being hunted down. And then season 3 just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. Early March is when season 3 wrapped up. And that season was all about the apostolic fathers. So that first generation of churchmen right after the last apostle died. So you can think of Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius may have known the apostle John. We know Polycarp certainly did. Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, and he makes reference about how he remembers Polycarp telling him stories about John. So there's a lot of intricate details there about how we can make these links back to the apostles. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. That season dealt with written works in that age, like the Didache, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Shepherd of Hermas.
Mm-hmm. Those were really interesting. I really enjoyed those episodes because of all the church history I've listened to, they always mention those, but quickly. As like to go into depth into those, like, yeah, these are really interesting books. Yeah. They're not gospel, but they're important.
They're not gospel, and yet the early church, I mean, they would read them. They would read them in church.
Yeah. I tend to think of like these early works are a little bit like, the way we use Tolkien or C.S. Lewis. They would not have wanted to be considered canon, and yet we respect them so much. And, Mere Christianity is like, it's not canon. Nobody would ever say it's part of the Bible, but we rely on it because it's just so much in our 20th century frame of mind is like we can process this easier.
Yeah. And the early church may well have seen the Shepherd of Hermas in that lens because many of them were reading it in church. And the core doctrinal issue at hand in that text is the issue of repentance. And so the early church took their holiness so seriously, and the Shepherd of Hermas really spoke to them regarding that. And then this season ended not that long ago with an episode on the Epistle to Diognetus, which outside of the New Testament, I think a lot of church historians would say that it's probably one of the most beautifully written apologetics about the Christian faith. The gospel is just so clearly presented to whoever Diognetus is. We don't know who he is or even what he is. It could be a literary motif for all we know.
Right.
And The letter is also anonymous. We don't know who wrote it. So it's a very mysterious letter, but it's a very beautifully written one. So, yeah. So the season ended with that. And alongside the podcast, I run a Substack. So subscribers to that Substack, I post full transcripts of every episode. I only started doing this with season 3, though. So the first 2 seasons are not on my Substack.
Okay.
Maybe in this interim, I should really backload them all on there or something. But the transcripts are on there if people want to even just read alongside the show. And every other week, I was putting out devotional articles, just really short ones that I could just kind of ramble on some sort of theological theme and go with it, tied to a particular theme from the preceding episode that I wasn't able to flesh out so much in the episode. So the reason I did that, and this is innate to the whole idea of the podcast itself, is that I want things to be very devotional related to it.
Right.
Because the whole point of church history is not just some analysis of something, but I think as Christians, if we actually recognize that we're a family, and if we want to get to know our family, then you need to study church history. And so this is a faith that we have inherited that has been passed along, and God has been faithful to his church through 2,000 years so far. And I think it's exciting to study this sort of thing. And
yeah, I like that idea of family, because I was struck by, in Jesus' high priestly prayer, he prays for all the church to be one.
Yeah.
And we tend to think that, and it is correct to think of it as through space. We're one, from this continent to that continent. We're one from this part of the city to that part of the city. As long as we're all faithful to the head, we're all one. But Jesus also makes it pretty clear that he's talking about his apostles and everyone who comes to faith through them. So we're one through time as well.
Yeah. Yep.
And sometimes that's the most important unity. If the rest of the church is, say, wandering, say, drifting, then it's more important to be one in time with the previous church, one with the foundation.
Yep.
And Paul's pretty clear of I'm laying the foundation. The New Testament, he wouldn't have called it the New Testament, but the idea, the teachings of the apostles, which is the New Testament, is the foundation, and everybody builds up from that, but we're all one building. So this idea of going back in time, seeing what your family's doing, some we haven't gotten there yet in your history. There's some black sheep in the family.
Yeah.
Oh dear, yeah, I guess we're related to them too.
It's a pretty messed up family, if we can call it that.
It's a pretty messed up family at times, but it's really inspiring at the beginning. So
it is. It's a messed up family. And yet, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, is I, the Lord, do not change. He has preserved his church through thick and thin, no matter what the church has faced. Mass heresy, mass persecution, to the point where you'd think the church is just a completely different organism from what it was at the very beginning. It's not, because Christ has preserved his church. And
it's still the same family. It's still the same branch.
Still the same family, yep, and will be presented to him without blemish.
And that's the really exciting part, I think, of studying church history, is it's important for your own walk. I mean, it's both. I'm a history nerd. I like the history, but it's really important. And I like the way that you have been emphasizing there's a devotional part to it. And it is a really important way to how do I relate to God differently because of what I'm understanding here through other parts of my family. This is my family 2,000 years ago. And, we know, for those of us who have long lineages, I don't really know my family further back than great grandparents, but it impacts your family from your genetic sense, but really in a spiritual sense, it's more important to know who your family is.
And I'm, theologically, I'm Dutch Reformed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about the Dutch Reformed tradition, their place in church history is, I'm biased, so to me, it's absolutely fascinating, but it's this very small world with a very long memory, if we could call it that.
So forgive my ignorance, but that's like Abraham Kuyper, Dutch Reformed.
But even before him, I mean, if we're thinking of the Synod of Dort, the Arminian controversy, and before all of that, even just the emergence of the Dutch Republic waging war against Spain. So you got the Reformed faith versus the
Belgium versus the Netherlands, and
before Belgium was there. I mean, southern Netherlands, the Low Countries, were very Catholic. So just all of that history. And since I'm actually from Canada, both sets of my grandparents actually immigrated from the Netherlands, and so I've got very close ties to that small pocket of Europe.
You've led right into one of my questions. I want to know where you were from and sort of your testimony in short. How did you come not only to podcasting, but come to belief? Is it through family or is it through, how did you get here?
So, like many testimonies start out with, I was born and raised in a Christian family in southern Ontario in Canada. So I grew up in the faith, but like a lot of people who grew up in the church, there was a season when I went off to college. There was a season where I just kind of was a little soft on my faith, lived at least like I had stepped away from it. I lived in a place. It was a university town, so it kind of had this certain energy to it that I kind of took advantage of, but obviously in ways that I'm not.
It's always in college, isn't it? It's always college is that vibe.
Yep. Eventually, though, kind of turned my life around there, and then ended up heading by Canadian standards very south to Dordt College, which is now Dordt University in Northwest Iowa, and that's where I did my undergrad in digital media production. It's also where I met my wife as well, which was the most important thing that took place there.
Yeah.
We got married in 2015, and then I actually went off to seminary to pursue not pulpit ministry. I had no desire to be a pastor, but I wanted in some ways to fuse my undergrad in digital media with theology. And so I enrolled in a Master of Theological Studies degree, and that's what I graduated.
So you've been working towards this for a while. This is sort of a culmination of a lot of your studies.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I had all these crazy dreams of wanting to be a famous film director in Hollywood, but
oh yeah.
I knew
right there with you.
I knew I was going to be the next Steven Spielberg. So, but that's not going to happen. Still my favorite film director though. Love his stuff.
Oh yeah.
So I graduated there, but even when I was there, I was working part-time in digital marketing, and they hired me full-time after I graduated in 2018. My wife and I decided to move closer to her family, and so we made the move to Pella, Iowa, which is also a very deeply Dutch town in central Iowa. It feels like it's a town that was built just for me, given my ecclesiastical and cultural heritage. So that's where we've landed. Yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So it's a real unique niche to be in podcasting, and not just podcasting, but history podcasting, not just history podcasting, but church history podcasting.
Yeah.
And also the style of it too. I think the cinematic just is, I get a strong Gladiator, Braveheart vibe from some of the way you set it up. So going into more church history focused questions, who do you feel like is the most underappreciated figure from church history for you personally?
It's funny. I struggle with this. And you know what? I think I land on Athanasius of Alexandria.
Athanasius Contra Mundum?
Athanasius Contra Mundum, yes. Athanasius against the world. And so I think why he's underappreciated, well, for one, we don't recite his creed enough in church.
But just that little underdog against the world, I feel like I'm right there with you. He's a perfect person for our era. I'm right. I know I'm right. The whole world is against me. I don't care.
It's like that one meme where there's like that dude in the center and he's surrounded by like thousands of people and he's pointing at them all and it says, "You're wrong," or something like that. Or "I'm right and you're wrong." I mean, that's essentially what was going on with,
or like
with
Polycarp. Away with the atheists is like that quiet, calm assertion of like, I'm not going to back down because I'm right.
Exactly. And they had such confidence, to say stuff like that. They had no qualms with saying, "I'm right, you're wrong." Anyways, I think with Athanasius, I think the weight of what he did and what it cost him, I think is deeply underappreciated sometimes. Not in church history circles necessarily, but in anyone who's a Christian who may be familiar with some things of church history. He's greatly underappreciated.
Especially in Protestant world too, yeah.
I was just going to say that, especially in evangelical and Protestant circles, where I think the Council of Nicaea can get referenced as which is great. We just celebrated the 1700th anniversary of it last year.
Yeah.
So the Council of Nicaea will get referenced as if it, meaning the council, resolved everything. But it actually didn't, and we don't think about what actually took place
right.
after Nicaea, right? I mean, Nicaea is integral to Christian history and what it did in confessing that the Son is of the same substance or essence as the Father against Arius. But and that was a watershed moment in church history.
Right.
But the Arian controversy did not end at Nicaea. And in some ways, it actually escalated and got worse because the Arian party regroups. You've got more bishops who are becoming Arian, and then you've got the emperors over the next several decades who are becoming Arians and who are systematically trying to undo everything that Nicaea did. And then I think it's in the mid 4th century time period, you got like the majority of bishops in the Eastern Church and the full institutional machinery of what Rome is backing it up is just this giant against what someone like Athanasius, this Orthodox bishop, has to stand up against. And so he does. He's like this rock, right? He's this immovable object in the center.
Makes me think of the guy in Tiananmen Square who standing up against the tank is like, yep, blocking the tank. It's like, it's good for you, man, because you better have some courage because that is
exactly. And he was like exiled a ton of times, comes back, exiled by like different emperors
who all had to be dissuaded to not kill him. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think it was Athanasius who has this very comical story of where he's actually on the run in a boat down a river, and he's ahead of whoever it is down the river trying to capture him, goes around the bend and like in darkness cloaks himself or something like that, and then actually turns around, passes those who are pursuing him, and actually says, "You're looking for Athanasius, right? Oh, he went that way," or just something like that. I think
sounds like Looney Tunes.
It's something hilarious like that. Yeah. I want to say that's Athanasius. Anyways, that's great. Just this guy who, like you said, Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world. It's an accurate description of what his ministry was like back then. And I think he's underappreciated for it, fighting for the integrity of the gospel. And then, of course, what he wrote, kind of his magnum opus on the incarnation. We're still reading that in seminaries today. And yeah,
it's pretty good if your book is still read like 1,800 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that.
I'll take that too. And so I think the Athanasian Creed, which wasn't written by him, was written in his honor and was, I don't know what the dates are on it, but it was written after him in the Western Church. And we classify that as one of our creeds, but we don't read it in church. It's longer. I understand that. Right. So, but I don't know. Let's at least talk about it a little bit more. So I think he's underappreciated.
Good answer. Actually, for you and I as podcasters, it's interesting. It's said that Arius was actually an incredibly talented media guy. What he did was he took all his theologies and made them into songs and made them into ditties. So that was how it spread, because people would remember the song, they'd remember the ditty, and it's like, so it works both ways. Like you can have media mastery for heresy or a media mastery for preaching the gospel.
That's fascinating. And I think also about Arius too is that we tend to think of heresiarchs, like the arch heretic of any given heresy, as like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. But heretics, especially even back then, were very, they came across very pastoral and well-meaning, kind men, but who were dead wrong, right? And that's actually frightening, because that's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, right, grandfatherly there. And
grandfatherly.
But like Richard Rohr strikes me as that.
Right.
It's like he seems so nice, and he's got a deep voice, and he's gentle. It's like, but what he's saying is wrong. So
and they're in their mind, they're trying to honor the scriptures with what they're seeing there and everything, and they think they're right, but they're dead wrong. And unfortunately for Arius, he died in a gruesome death in the marketplace. So we won't go into that. But some people think it was poisoned, others just chalk it up to the judgment of God, but who knows? Yeah.
So who do you think is the most misunderstood figure from church history?
I think this one might shock some people, but honestly, I think Martin Luther in some ways can be misunderstood.
Has been definitely historically
I think,
misunderstood by several people. Yeah.
yes, and I think that's probably more where I'm getting at. He's probably been one of the more flattened figures in the history of the Western Church.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the Protestant side, we have this very strong tendency to lionize him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's kind of like this swashbuckling Jack Sparrow who revolutionized the Protestant church.
I'd watch that movie. Martin
That
Luther's
would
Jack
be
Sparrow.
a crossover of Pirates of the Caribbean and Martin
Errol
Luther.
Flynn, yeah.
He's the guy who stood up to Rome and who nailed or glued the 95 Theses to the door. I think we have this tendency as Protestants to make him into kind of a pure hero.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of truth in a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
He did show extraordinary strength and courage at Worms.
Yeah.
And if he actually did say, "Here I stand," then that's pretty historically significant. It's actually debated whether he said that or not.
Really? Interesting. I did not know that. I
yeah.
do know that he was kidnapped by his friends because they thought he was going to be killed. I always thought he went into hiding. Apparently he was too brash to go into hiding. They had to kidnap him and force him to go into hiding.
Yep. And so we got a lot of these clean versions of Luther, but that leaves out a lot. But then you got the other side who read Luther probably a little more broadly, who more or less approach him from a Catholic perspective and dismiss a lot of the things that he wrote later in life that are pretty troubling and indefensible. That's why they dismiss him.
Yeah, and that's fair to critique him for that. His most infamous one on Jewish people. He actually was told by his wife to not write it. She said, "You're just grumpy, knock it off," because he could get into kind of vendettas and he could get really crabby. And so this was just like him ranting on Facebook, basically.
Pretty much.
She's like, "You should not publish that." So good reason to always listen to your wife.
Yep.
Yeah, that could have saved a lot of hassle if he just...
Totally.
Because she knew him pretty well.
His rhetoric could be coarse. It could be...
Some of it humorously so.
He was funny. He has written a lot of funny stuff.
Yeah.
But some of his later writings, like as you've mentioned, could come across as very anti-Semitic, and that's a real thing that shouldn't just be brushed aside. But then going from Luther wrote some genuinely terrible things to Luther was essentially a destructive figure is kind of an overcorrection that fails to engage with the full breadth of his theology and what he studies. So there shouldn't just be one thing that we nitpick from him and then paint him and flatten him into this one image, which I think is why I think he can be one of the most misunderstood.
Right.
Because
the tricky thing is he's both. He's kind of both of those people. He can be irascible, cranky, immensely unwise,
there's
and
that.
angry. And then he could be super bold.
Think about he's this guy who comes out of insane medieval piety who's concerned about the crushing demands on his life. And I think we don't think about that often enough, about what exactly Luther went through, because he was spiritually shattered by that sort of an experience. And so what comes out of that, I think, is from a church history perspective and a Protestant perspective. I mean, it's just his experience in the monastery with his spiritual assaults and his anguish before God, and what comes out of that is really beautiful. He describes it as if he experienced the gospel for the very first time. I'm talking about his Wittenberg monastery tower experience, and how he meditated on Romans 1:17 and what that meant for him, where he continuously thought that when that passage speaks of the righteousness of God, that it's talking about a standard of perfection for sinners. But eventually he came to the conclusion that this is a righteousness that he gives to sinners through faith, justification by faith alone.
Found that anchor. He found the rock.
I love how this episode is just continuously going back to that Hebrew phrase.
We're
looping around to "I, the Lord, do not change."
That's right. He found the rock, and I think that steadied him. And, it's like you said about the anchor. That doesn't mean we can't get blown off course a little bit. We have a little bit of a leash that Luther is demonstrating, but
God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick.
There you go.
So I think the misunderstood aspect of Luther that I'm trying to get at is more or less going back to a lot of this tower experience that he went through, because we can relate to a lot of that if we've felt under pressure of some sort of a religious system of sorts that is just, burdening us with guilt, and I'm not confessing enough. Think about the assurance of faith that Luther experienced, all the anxiety of striving after something in his works and his desperate earning of something just collapses all at once for him. And he actually understands grace, like for the first time, that's fully sufficient. And I think that's maybe another aspect of Luther that we misunderstand too, is that he was certainly not the first reformer.
Oh no.
He
is the first one who survived.
Yeah, seriously. He fast pedaled the Reformation. No thanks to the printing press. Right. But yeah, you got guys like Jan Hus before him who were doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's funny when I think of his mentor, von Staupitz, who reportedly told him at one point that essentially you need to find a God who's worth loving and not a God not just fearing. And think about those words. I think that really helped Luther as well experience the sort of grace that he did. So his theology is a lot more than just some sort of a Reformation bumper sticker that we can find, you know, because his theology of the cross is also what he's known for, which, and maybe this goes back to what's maybe underappreciated about him. We think of Luther as just this, again, we lionize him for being against indulgences and nailing his thesis on the door. And that's really all we like to focus on. But when we think of the pastoral side of him, his theology of the cross is an incredible contribution, I think, to Christian theology in our tradition. And it's kind of this basic idea that God is found not just in his glory, but in the kind of hidden weaknesses in our lives and in the sufferings that we go through. And then obviously in the apparent defeat of his son on the cross. And so when we look to, just by reason of our own achievements, want to try and find God in his strength, Luther says the God of the Bible actually hides himself in the cross. And it's not some sort of something to be embarrassed about or to be explained away, but it's a mode of self-revelation of who God is. And I think that actually has great pastoral implications for how we can understand suffering and the ways that we fail in this life. So I think people who casually reference Luther don't know a lot about what he wrote. So
right, because he is such an important historical figure that everybody has at least, the Wikipedia summary of him.
Exactly.
So they know enough, but it's like Calvin or Augustine or any of these big things where they're both important in church history and history of this is world history too.
Yeah.
So who's a figure from church history that you'd most like to meet, not counting Jesus?
I would love to meet John Chrysostom.
Oh, interesting.
So
the silver tongue,
golden mouth. For your listeners who may not know who John Chrysostom is, Chrysostom's a nickname. It's not his actual name. It just means golden mouth, and it's given to him posthumously because he was regarded as one of the most brilliant preachers, not only of that time, but I think in all of church history. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople at the end of the 4th and I think beginning of the 5th century. And so he was right in the cradle of the Eastern Roman Empire, and he used his position as Archbishop to be absolutely relentless in his preaching against the sins of the city, the wealth, the corruption, the exploitation of the poor. And so he very much preached openly against Empress Eudoxia, who...
She did not like that.
She did not like it. And so he, again, kind of like Athanasius, he's one of these figures who gets exiled a couple of times, twice, I think, ultimately. And his second exile was his death sentence. But his story is just super epic. I've always thought that if there was ever another sort of Hollywood movie akin to the Ten Commandments, it should be done on John Chrysostom.
There's so many great stories in there that's the thing about church history is it's fascinating, but it seems dry until you just take off that layer of that veneer. Is this is really Braveheart-ish.
Yeah, and there's so many threads in his story that would just, I think, adapt so well on screen, where the church in Constantinople is trying to protect him from getting arrested by the guards, and a ton of them get slaughtered while they're inside the sanctuary and stuff like that. Chrysostom develops a very friendly relationship with one of the nuns there. I forget her name.
Quick note, her name was Olympias.
And according to Needham, they have this very beautiful departing as he goes off into his second exile. So there's a lot of like very dramatic moments in his life that I can just visualize on screen as being very beautiful and maybe even award winning. Let's say that. So Chrysostom's one that I can't wait to meet, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Augustine is maybe another one. I think what he went through, if you've ever read his confessions and just kind of relating to him and some of the struggles that he had.
No, I've only read chunks. I've never read it all the way through.
Yeah, just a fascinating piece of work that he wrote. I think every Christian should read that book all the way through. And
first autobiography in world history, some people would say.
Mm-hmm.
Just from the cinematic angle as well, there's so many untold stories. I know, have you seen the trailer for A Great Awakening that's coming out?
I have, yeah.
So I can't recommend that movie yet because I haven't seen it, but the trailer I can recommend. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it looks really good.
So there are so many stories, either not known or too poorly known, or like these are fascinating, amazing, epic stories that are part of our family, you know, can be both instructive, inspiring, or sometimes both.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love church history and I love your take on it. So I always end podcasts with 3 quick questions. What's your favorite book?
Oh man. Can it, like, what kind of a book are you thinking of? Like nonfiction, fiction?
Anything.
Oh man. My favorite book. I'll do 2 here, fiction and nonfiction.
All right.
My favorite nonfiction. So I'm a big fantasy reader.
Oh, okay.
And I'm a big Wheel of Time junkie.
Oh,
the TV show was terrible.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad it was canceled.
I've heard that from a lot of people.
I'm glad it was canceled, but the books are great. My favorite nonfiction book is probably, so I love studying eschatology, study of end things, last things, and I've absolutely loved Sam Storms's Kingdom Come, the Amillennial Alternative.
Interesting.
I'm not a fan of his charismatic views or pneumatology, but I love his eschatology. And that has been probably one of my go-to books on eschatology, and then G.K. Beale's shorter commentary on Revelation.
Oh, okay. We could have a whole separate conversation on that. I was just talking to, Keith Foskey.
Yeah.
Yep. Who does Conversations with Calvinists. So he calls himself the king of the amillennials. So
yes, he does. I'm well aware of that.
But yeah, faithful minds can differ on that one.
Yep.
So what is your favorite tree?
Maple, because I'm Canadian.
There you go. And
I love willows, though.
Okay.
Oh man, weeping willows. Yeah.
Weeping willows. We'll have a split answer on that one. And finally, your favorite city and or region or area?
My wife and I visited Italy a couple summers ago and went to Florence, so really fell in love with that country. But I've always had a heart for going back to my roots in the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
So, yep.
Do you speak any Dutch?
I do not. My dad did. He was fluent, but I do not speak any Dutch.
And
nope. I'd love to.
I was going to say, with your name being Luttjeboer, you'd have to speak a little Dutch.
That's like, there are probably only 2 families of Luttjeboers in the entire country of America, and that's me and my brother.
So how many mispronunciations have you heard on Luttjeboer, and what is the best?
My brother once got called Lunchables. Luttjeboer. It's man, it is all over the place. And
I would have no clue how to say it, except I've heard you say it so often on your podcast.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Okay, that's not too hard.
Yep. And yeah. I am shocked when I have actually heard people pronounce it correct the very first try who have never heard it before. It means little farmer.
Oh, okay. Oh, boar, like the Boer War.
Yep. And then Lutia is the J-E in that, I think, is some sort of I'm not sure what the grammatical term is for something that's like a diminutive or something like it. It just means little.
Okay.
So
little farmer. There you go.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I recommend your podcast heartily to everyone who wants to know about church history or just wants to have a good time and likes Braveheart and or Gladiator.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again, Jared, for that conversation. That was fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And listener, I hope you'll join me again on the next episode, where we'll dig deep into Jesus' words to Pergamum, the 3rd church of the 7 churches of Revelation. In the meantime, Go dig a little bit deeper in the Word, and remember, in Christ, in Him, the Lord has set us free and put our feet into a broad and spacious place. Bammerhab, a huge word just waiting to be explored. So let's go exploring. Bammerhab was built because there's so much great stuff in the Bible, and too few of us ever get to hear about it. When we know about the Bible, then God is faithful to use that to change our lives. Yes, Greek and Hebrew can seem scary and remote to all but seminarians, but this podcast exists so that you will feel much more comfortable to go tackle this stuff on your own. So, I really hope you got something out of this episode. If you did, I'd appreciate it immensely if you made it easier for other listeners to find Bammerhab by leaving a review or a comment. That input makes you a part of Bammerhab, and you are a part of sharing the depths of the Bible with more and more folks. Also, check out the show notes for more information. And a quick shout out to Aaron Woodard, who did this show's design, and Dave Allen for teaching me how to podcast, and to Bible Hub for all their amazing resources on Greek and Hebrew. Till next time, this was SDG Morgan and Bammerhab.